an orthopedist who originated in Syria. And this orthopedist's 29-year-old wife concluded to remodel the place on the inside. Some of her ideas were singular indeed, but at least the place now has a hot tub and all the appurtenances that are necessary for modern life. The place is now in private ownership, but as I said, again, it's a bed and breakfast. Nobody actually lives there. There's a caretaker. I haven't the slightest idea what kind of business they have. The block we're about to walk into is probably my favorite residential block in all of Galesburg. I ask you to take a look at the house to the right. That was built by a gentleman named McKnight in the 1880s, Queen Anne style for reasons that I have mentioned already. Certain Romanesque elements in it too, but the roof is really too high to be too peaked to be altogether convincing as Romanesque. Brackets holding the roof up, several different colors of paint. You notice in that chimney, McKnight, who was an Irishman by ancestry, managed to locate an Irish harp which is set inside the map of Illinois. The one across the street dates from 1857. Beautifully maintained. It's the kind of place that finds its place onto house walks whenever things like that take place. It was opened a couple of years ago. It's built in what in England would be called the Georgian style. We don't build Georgian style houses in America. We build the federal style. The major axis of that house is parallel to the street, as opposed to what would be the case with Greek Revival. Otherwise, it's very symmetrical. The door's right in the middle. Tall, narrow windows with multi-panes. They had to be multi-panes because the machinery didn't exist to generate panes that would occupy the entire sash. The roof's relatively flat. That's pretty much a color scheme that it would have been in 1857, white with green shutters. We'll say something about white paint a little bit later on. Now we're looking across the street and here at two of the rare examples in town of the Gothic revival in domestic architecture. We'll look at this place first. What characterizes it as Gothic revival is the vertical siding, the board and batten character of the siding. The color is sort of earth tone, maybe not quite. I guess you could persuade yourself it's earth tone. Tall, narrow windows. These happen to have panes that are non-conforming to the house's age, but I guess we won't complain about that. Very steep roof. Andrew Jackson Downing, as I say, was a major architectural writer in this country in the 1850s, an enthusiastic proponent of the Gothic revival style. He thought that the siding of houses like this should be built up vertically because that's the way trees grow. That's the way water runs through wood naturally. To lay siding horizontally is contrary to nature and probably self-destructive. Downing was also in favor of earth colors for houses. He thought white was just awful. White is not a color that occurs all that frequency in nature, whereas colors of this sort do indeed. Now the place across the street is, if anything, an even more striking example of the Gothic revival style. What with the gingerbread porch pillars, the hood molds that are up over those tall, narrow windows, the steep roof again. I don't even know what you call that feature that's up in the peak. But the red color is something that would have made Andrew Jackson Downing blanch. Oh yeah, you would. The house we just walked past is of some interest. Before it became a residential structure again, it was a Knox College fraternity house. I can't remember which one. I think maybe Phi Delta, but that goes way back. Before that, it was a house that was built by O.T. Johnson. Once again, some of you of a certain age will remember Galesburg's big store, the O.T. Johnson Company, which was on Main Street. And it really was a big store. And the store shut down in the late 1970s. The space was occupied by an antique store for a while, but the whole place burned down a year ago January. The house across the street is of interest because until recently it housed the Galesburg Historical Society. Before that, it was located on that vacant lot that I'm pointing at. The Salvation Army owned it. The Salvation Army announced one day in 1975 that it was going to knock this house down. As a result, a group of local people rather suddenly got together and organized the Galesburg Historical Society, scraped together enough money to pick that house up, move it across the street. Before they did that, of course, they had to dig a basement and build a foundation, put the house on top, raised some money for that, but ended up several $100,000 in debt, too. Where they waited for some time for additional funding to come, didn't come. The president of the Historical Society was a man named Frank Ward, who was very good with old ladies. He was also a local attorney. I'm getting ahead of myself. I was on the board of the Galesburg Historical Society for a while. At one meeting, Ward said, "You all realize that technically you're liable for the indebtedness of this organization," at which time I thought it was prudent to resign my membership of the board, which I did. But that was okay because shortly after an old lady died and she left the Galesburg Historical Society a big sum of money, paid off the indebtedness, allowed the house to be rehabbed substantially. Since then, the Historical Society has found that house to be surplus. They sold it to a couple from Chicago, actually a family from Chicago, who moved down here thinking that Galesburg would be a better place to raise kids than Chicago. A certain amount of that kind of thing is happening. It's not anything that is statistically significant, but we hear about it from time to time. I'd hate to think that that's what Galesburg future is going to amount to, but there is a development. The building across the street is a relic of a time when just about the only occupational opportunities for young women who lived in the country or in very small towns was to come to a place like Galesburg, maybe find an occupation as a shop girl in a department store, or perhaps working as a clerk somewhere, or possibly working as a seamstress in one of the clothing factories, of which there were a couple here at one time. This is to say that these young ladies weren't necessarily escaping parental influence. Their parents would have felt a lot more safe if they had known that their daughters were coming to a flesh pot like Galesburg and living under protected circumstances. This institution would have provided those circumstances. It was built in 1917 as the Catherine Club. You can see the name Catherine Club on above the third floor on that stone tablet. The Catherine Club was a place that provided a room, wholesome meals, ensured that the young women had to be in bed at a proper time, and they probably didn't live there any more than a year or two before they went home and got married. This was a place which made a certain amount of sense in the teens and 20s, and maybe even the 30s of the 20th century, certainly not after World War II. And the place finally closed down as a residence for unmarried women in 1974, and it's simply an apartment house now. We'll stop here briefly just to take a look at First Presbyterian Church. erstwhile known as Second Presbyterian Church for reasons that I indicated early on in the tour. I mention it simply because it's been sandblasted recently. Before it was sandblasted, it was practically black. It turned that way from the smoke that was generated by the steam locomotives, who used to switch in the yards that were much closer to the Knox campus than they are now. Knox students have been troubled by railway noise for a long time. It's just that its origin has a way of shifting around geographically. Off to your left is what's left of O.T. Johnson's. The vast pile of bricks that the fire left is finally being cleared out. It took about a year for the city to get proper title to the property and to find a bid for the cleaning up of the mess that was satisfactory to the city council. Here's a look at what's left of Galesburg's two erstwhile downtown movie palaces. This was the West, which has been closed for several years. The Orpheum across the street is closed as a movie theater, but it was substantially rehabbed several years ago. You're not getting a good look at it from here. We'll see it a little bit better once we get further south because it's blocked by that rather blank white wall there. But the Orpheum was rehabbed at a cost of something like $1 million about 12, 15 years ago. And it does stay open. A lot of traveling shows perform there. The symphony performs there. There's a fair amount of activity. Not enough really on the basis of the activity alone to keep the place open. There has to be a city subsidy. And of course the place constantly needs work, but it maintains. Now this is about as far as the narrated tour goes. I think you can find your way back from here. Whiting Hall is supposed to be open briefly this afternoon. My wife and I are going to go see if we can still get in Whiting Hall. So anybody else wants to try it is certainly welcome to follow us and find out whether we're in luck or not. Otherwise, anyone who wishes to proceed, thank you for attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.